Hello, my name is Tim Martin. I'm a reporter with MLive.com. I'm joined here by another MLive reporter, Jonathan Osting. And we're joined today by Senator Gretchen Whitmer. She is the top-ranked Democrat in the Michigan Senate. Thanks for joining us, Senator.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're going to get to audience questions in a few minutes here. Fritz Klug of MLive, he's acting as our producer, and he's going to help us out with that. So please feel free to add questions down in the comment section, and we'll get to those in a little bit. We have a few questions of our own for the Senator, though, to get the ball rolling. Senator, the legislature, it's early in the budget process, but some committees are meeting today, have met in the last couple of days. Based on what you have seen so far, knowing that Democrats are outnumbered by Republicans in both chambers, what do you think so far of the budgets that are being advanced by the Republican-led committees, and what are your top priorities going to be as the budget process unfolds?
All right, so there are a lot of parts to that question, so remind me if I answer one part and don't get to everything. But I'll start by saying thanks for having me. I know this is the first live broadcast, and I'm happy to be your guinea pig and awfully thrilled to be here with you. You know, I have, this is my 13th year in the legislature, and in the House I was the ranking Democrat on the budgets for a number of years. And I know that this is very early on in a budget process, although in the last couple of years our budgets have been completed earlier than many years. I will say that as we see the budgets moving, I remain very concerned about the continued disinvestment into education by this administration and by my Republican colleagues. You know, we have seen higher education flip-flop, where we used to fund it at a 75% level and tuition made up 25%. Now it's the exact opposite, and we're seeing this college tax being forced on kids who so desperately need this education to be competitive. You know, and that's really a very awful trend. And as we move forward to look at college tuition increasing from like 235% from what it was when I started just 13 years ago, that's how much tuition's increased. I think we're making a lot of bad decisions. You know, a budget is not just a balance sheet. It's a state of values. It's a statement of your values, of your priorities. And under this, you know, the Governor Snyder's leadership, they have divested from education. And I think that's the most important investment that we can make. And so that remains our top priority, and that remains my concern as these budgets continue to move forward.
The 2% funding increase that was proposed by the governor and the House Appropriations Committee today went along with that 2%. Not enough in your book?
Well, and it's increase. I would put increase in quotes because it's all relative. You know, it's not, doesn't even keep up with inflation, much less undo the damage that Snyder and the Republicans have done to education by taking the per pupil allowance and slashing it. I will tell you, as a mom, I've got two daughters. One is in 5th grade, one's in 4th grade. My 4th grader's class was 24. It's 36 now. Now, this governor likes to talk about metrics, but we know that class size matters. He's conveniently ignoring some pretty well-established factors in determining whether or not our schools are going to be able to perform and make sure that our kids, most importantly, are successful. And so those are numbers and values that I'm looking at as these budgets go forward.
Senator, you've been pretty outspoken about your the state's new right-to-work law. What do you think both the economic and political implications of that new law are going to be in the next year or two?
I'll tell you, you know, I've served for 13 years. I'm the longest-serving legislator down here. I'm tied with a couple other people, but because I came over to the Senate in a special election, I'm actually the dean of the state Senate. I'll tell you, I've never seen anything as divisive and ugly as our lame duck session that we had in December. I talked to my father, who served in the Milliken and Romney administrations. He was stunned. You know, he's been a political insider and, you know, worked in the periphery of the Capitol his whole life. Never seen anything like that. I think that when the governor came out initially and said that things are going so great in Indiana, it's because of right to work, I don't think that that was genuinely true. I believe that it was politically motivated retribution for Proposal 2 as they saw it, and that's why they moved forward with it. It's not backed by any metrics. or any science that bears out that it's good for business, much less increases job opportunities for people or freedom for people, which is, kind of how they packaged it, that it was just political retribution. And I don't think it's going to change the environment in terms of our economy at all. I don't think that we will see that. And if you look at the statistics in Indiana, his poster child for doing this, it hasn't helped. We know that. And if we'd had full and fair hearings instead of jamming it through lame duck the way that they did, we would have known that. The public would have known that. Unfortunately, they chose to go a different route, and I think that there are going to be a lot of legal challenges to how they did it and the different classes that are treated differently within right to work. But I think at the end of the day, it's the workers that are going to, be hurt by the legislation that was passed, supposedly to help workers.
Sure.
It saddens me, and I hate to see this process abused the way that it was in lame duck.
Sure. The governor, often said it wasn't on his agenda and seemed to kind of, at least publicly, reluctantly go along with it. Do you still, consider him responsible ultimately for the law?
I do. At the end of the day, the buck stops in the governor's office, and he's the one that did the about face and pushed the legislation through, locked the people out of the Capitol, even locked some of the press corps out of the Capitol. My office let a number of press people into the building because they were locked out and unable to even cover what was happening at the Capitol. I think that there's a real credibility issue. The governor wants to and needs to work with Democrats to accomplish a lot of the things that he's put on the table. But I would say trust is pretty low right now in Lansing.
Let's talk about 2014 and your next steps. At the end of 2014, you'll be done as a state senator. You have said you are not going to run for governor in 2014. What are you going to do?
I don't know, Tim. I know that right now, as the Democratic leader and as the counterpoint to the governor, it's my responsibility to not just my constituents, but to all the Democrats that overwhelmingly reelected Barack Obama, elected Debbie Stabenow, would have had a Democratic House but for gerrymandering. I do represent the majority of people that voted in the last election, and so I take that responsibility very seriously every single day in the Senate. I took my name out of the running for governor. I actually had never thrown it in, but a lot of other people had, and I thought it was important to clarify that that was not something I feel that I'm going to do in 2014 because of my desire to be, on hand with my girls who are now 9 and 11 years old and heading into those turbulent teenage years. And if they're anything like I was, they're going to need constant supervision. But, I love public service. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had for the last 13 years, even though I've been in the minority my whole time. I really think that this is an important job. I really worry going forward that women's voices are not being heard very loudly at the Capitol. I am sad when I look at the state of the Senate. When I came over in the special election, we took a picture. There were 12 women, which was a historic high for the state of Michigan. In the next election, just 8 months later, we went down to 8. And then the following election, we're now at 4. And when I leave, if I'm replaced by a man and no other women are elected, we'll be at 3 women out of 38. And that really concerns me. I talked about it yesterday at the pay equity event at the Capitol, which is, to note that it takes women, to the April 9th to make as much money as a man did in 2012. Women would have to work till April 9th of 2013. Michigan's far behind. And I worry that we're never going to really have equality if our voices aren't being heard. And so that's something that I'm working toward in 2014 as well.
Things change, and right now you're kind of taking a look at things as you sit back. But sitting here today, do you envision a time where you do run for some sort of statewide office?
It's very possible. I really think that public service is important, and I really worry that the voices of many people are not being heard. And if I can contribute to that, I would take a look at almost anything. Yeah.
Senator, somewhat related question from a reader. What are you doing to prepare the Senate Democratic Caucus for 2014? I see you're very vocal on policy issues, but that doesn't necessarily do good in a super minority. Where is the new leadership going to come from in the next election cycle?
Well, it's a great question. I'm glad that someone's reached out and asked that. I go around the state and talk to groups, as the top Democrat right now at the state capitol. I'm asked to talk to a lot of people because the majority of people in Michigan, I think, want to hear both sides of an issue and want to know that there's someone fighting. When the bullying issue came through the legislature, my Republican colleagues amended this effort to protect kids to create an exception for bullies, whether it was a religious or moral reason. We got national news. I got up and gave a speech that was, 3 minutes long, I think. It wasn't that it was that great a speech, and it wasn't about me. It's because this issue impacts so many people. That speech went viral. Over 400,000 people saw it in 72 hours. Stephen Colbert put it on the Word segment of his show. We got national media. People from around the world were calling into my office. I got a call from Tunisia. I talked to a kid in the UP. It's an issue that resonated with people. And as long as we can make sure that the people understand the decisions that Governor Snyder and the Republicans have made in Lansing have not benefited us, we are in a strong position going into 2014. I might be in a super minority right now, but we changed the whole trajectory of that bullying issue because this issue connected with the people, and that's what we're going to do. Whether you are a senior who now pays a pension tax, whether you're a mother who sees her kids' class sizes growing like I do, whether you're one of those kids that desperately needs more investment in education or is getting priced out of college. We all have a stake in what has happened in the last 2 years. We're all bearing a greater burden to pay for Governor Snyder's business tax cut. And you know what? We're going to speak out, and we're going to speak out at the polls. You
mentioned the pension tax. Do you think it's realistic in this budget cycle to take a whack at that thing, get rid of it, or downsize it a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if you see Democrats try to do that. And I have seen my Republican colleagues all of a sudden start talking about having a bill that gets rid of the pension tax. I think that as people are preparing their taxes and they're due next week, they're really seeing the change in the burden, whether you're a senior who's not getting the $600 credit, you're a parent who's not getting your credit for your children, you're not getting the earned income tax credit for the working poor. Tax bills have gone up for a lot of people, and $200 doesn't mean much to Governor Snyder or maybe even to legislators, but it can mean the difference between getting your car fixed and making sure that you paid this tax bill. It can mean the difference between what you're putting on the table, if you're getting all your prescriptions filled or a portion of them.
The issue that the governor raises is an issue of fairness, that if you don't have the pension tax, you have people with different sources of income, one paying taxes, one not paying taxes, but the same amount of income. And other states have pension taxes. How do you respond to that?
The problem with the pension tax is that so many of our seniors have worked their whole lives. They did the math. They paid into the system. They saved money. They did the math and calculated a retirement, and they left the workforce counting on that. To change the rules on someone who's already out of the workforce and is relying on this finite income is patently unfair. So for the governor to say this is about fairness, well, then apply something going forward. Put people on notice. Give them the ability to make those necessary budget choices. But there aren't any 80-year-olds who are going to go back into the workforce and be able to all of a sudden supplement their income in a meaningful way that undoes the damage of the pension tax. So that's really put so many people in a very, very tough spot.
Speaking of fairness, we've got another reader question from Broken T-Wing. What is the most fair means to collect necessary funding for infrastructure repairs? Obviously, the governor's, calling for new revenue for roads. How do we get there?
That's a great question. And, I think many of us at the Capitol acknowledge that our roads are in desperate need of repair and investment. I will also say, though, that doubling registration fees, which the governor proposed and was opposed by his own Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson, it's a non-starter on his own side of the aisle. I'll say that gas taxes, I think, probably the least palatable way of funding this was what the governor proposed. And a lot of us are scratching our heads and wondering why he chose that method other than his user fee. Was there some research that supported this? Because I think that it's enormously unpopular. You talk about sales taxes, which some of my colleagues are talking about. That is another regressive tax, which after the shifting of tax burden onto our seniors and our, kids' schools and, all the choices that these Republicans have made that have been so regressive, an added sales tax, I just don't see how that is politically feasible, especially when you're going to have to go to the voters and ask them to support it. So if we're going to talk about infrastructure, it's got to be, everyone's got to be at the table. They can't do it just on Republican votes. And if they're going to put a plan worthy of consideration on the table, it's got to have something that really benefits people in it, not just a road plan that the governor wants to see done, but something that's really going to benefit the people of our state. Maybe there's an education component to it. That's something where I think the debate is to be had. But in terms of where you go and what sources you go to, I'm not the one that's putting an infrastructure plan on the table. I am in the minority. I am going to be a part of the solution, but we're not even to the point where we're sitting down at the table and having those discussions, unfortunately.
You mentioned education there. Are you talking some sort of a trade-off, if you will?
No, I would just observe that the governor, this is one of his top priorities. My top priority is education. Mm-hmm. So when you have two people who need each other to get something done, you got to talk about each other's priorities. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. Okay. We've got another reader question here. There were 282 bills in lame duck. Many were vehicle bills, perhaps tied to ALEC. Are you worried that too much happened, and are you, I guess, worried about the role of outside groups in forming public legislation here in Michigan?
Well, absolutely, and I think that we should all be concerned when you have a group of unaccountable legislators casting votes just as they're on their way out the door. We should all be concerned about that, especially when they conduct themselves the way that my colleagues did in December by literally blocking the public out of the building, not having debate, not having committee hearings. We've got the greatest system in the world. And I talk to second graders about how a bill becomes a law. And the first part is it goes to committee and the public is able to come in and weigh in, and there's a debate and everyone can watch it, critique it, give opinions. None of that happened. I think more second graders know how our democratic process is supposed to work than maybe some of my colleagues do. And I think that when you do things under this cloak of secrecy, that you make mistakes. And unfortunately, whether it's the right to work law or it's the PPT that was not fully vetted, and our locals are going to have a hard time with police and fire funding because of the decisions that were made in lame duck, that is a part of, why it's so important that we have that debate. If something's good policy, it can be fully vetted. It can withstand scrutiny. It can withstand the media looking at it and asking questions and people, weighing in. But while my colleagues and the governor like to talk about metrics and openness, their behavior in lame duck belies everything that their rhetoric.
All right, let's see what else the readers. Reminder to readers watching, you can submit questions to us at any time. I think I missed one here.
Going pretty smoothly, considering this is the first one.
Yeah, this is our first live video chat. Thanks for staying with us. This is from Mark Clark. He references a Detroit News headline. Now, this is in regards to a House Democratic proposal to use rainy day fund and Medicaid savings to cover costs. The question for you on the Senate side is Michigan in any position to start spending more money than it has in the past? Has the economy recovered enough to start considering new spending proposals?
Well, our economy is on the mend. But that being said, I will say that we have put a really bold plan on the table. The Senate Democrats have what we are calling the Michigan 2020 plan. And for anyone who's watching who knows someone who's getting ready to graduate from high school, you can go on to Michigan2020.com, enter our competition, and maybe win a scholarship for college or community college. We put this plan on the table, and it comes with a big price tag because what we want to do is give everyone free college tuition, whether they are graduating from homeschool, private school, or public school, an opportunity to go on to school. And whether it's four-year university for them, public university, or community college, or a trade school, we say, let's put Michigan on the map, like Kalamazoo did with the Promise. Let's make this opportunity available to every kid in Michigan. Now, of course, we are going to have to figure out how to fund it and fund it responsibly. What we've done is we've said we're not going to raise taxes. We're going to go through all $35 billion of tax expenditures that's in the governor's budget, and tax expenditures is just a fancy way of saying tax break for someone or for something. Go through them and give them the same scrutiny that the rest of our budget gets. Make them stand up and say why they should have this special treatment under the tax code. And if they don't make a good case, if it's not an important public policy, like not taxing medication, or if it's not creating jobs, then we should get rid of it. The Mackinac Center, which is the right wing, has said we shouldn't be doing any of these tax expenditures. Well, I say let's go through them and grade them, and let's take the politics out of it. I shouldn't grade them. We should have a group of economists look at them and give them an A through F grade, and if something doesn't live up to our scrutiny, we should get rid of it. If you found just 5% savings out of that $35 billion, you could fund a full 4 years of school for every kid graduating in Michigan from high school. That's what we propose. So yeah, we are in a position where we can make better use of state dollars. That is an investment that would pay off for everyone's benefit, and that's something that we're really excited about.
Senator, some House Republicans have said that they don't feel that plan is realistic, partly because of the price tag involved, which I believe is $1.8 billion.
Once you have 4 full years of students in the program, right.
Is it a realistic plan? I mean, where we're going to come up with $1.8 billion from?
Absolutely.
When we just talked about we're not able to find $1.2 billion for roads.
Absolutely. I think that my Republican colleagues have not sat down and looked at the plan, and they certainly haven't had any committee hearings on it. Not one person has said it's an unworthy goal. So I'm encouraged by that. Even the critics say we should, this is something that would be nice to do. So if we share that goal, we can work out any detail. I will say that they're just dead wrong. They funded tax cuts for business to the same exact price tag just in the last 2 years. They did it by taxing seniors. I'm saying let's stop giving special treatment to certain industries that have had a great relationship with the legislator 30 years ago and have been resting on that and been getting all this favorable treatment for years. Let's stop doing that. Let's stop picking winners and losers in our tax code among business entities, level their playing field, and use the savings from that to invest in our people.
Would you consider eliminating a tax credit or exemption? Isn't that the same thing as a tax increase?
Not at all. The way that the governor's budget, his own budget reads, the report that the treasurer puts together says that tax expenditures are spending. It's spending. And if it's foregone, if it's something that's due and owing to the state that it's foregone because someone had a great relationship with the legislator 40 years ago, it doesn't make sense anymore. We should not be spending our money that way. And you know what? Even if something does bear withstand our scrutiny, they still should be subject to our scrutiny. We owe it to the taxpayer to go through every dollar that we spend and every dollar we choose not to collect and say, is that a good expenditure for our taxpayers? And the fact that they're ignoring $35 billion of that means that they're not doing their jobs, and I think that's a crime right there in and of itself, and we shouldn't do our jobs.
All right, we've got another reader question from Christine Berry. She cites a recent Council on American Islamic Relations scorecard in which a lot of Democrats got A's and a lot of Republicans got D's and F's. The scorecard was related to issues important to Muslims such as anti-bullying, collective bargaining, photo ID, and so on. She asks, can you speak to the point that these hyper-partisan issues seem to have a significant racial or ethnic impact, tend to break down along party lines, and what can we do to help improve these relations?
I think one of the really toughest things to watch in a legislature is the extremists really getting the limelight. You know, there are a lot of people who want to be problem solvers, but I think tough primaries and overly partisanly drawn districts get extremists into the legislature. You know, when I read Dave Agema's comments about, you know, gay marriage, it just turns my stomach. I'm embarrassed to be, you know, a legislator in the state of Michigan that he was a legislator in. To show such intolerance is so ignorant. And for this governor not to come in and condemn stuff like that, I think means that they quietly watch it happen and play out, that they have a responsibility. You know, the governor is the leader of the Republican Party. And if someone like Dave Agema can be out there spouting, you know, his hateful remarks and pushing legislation when he was in office that, you know, that was very vitriolic and you know, closed-minded and intolerant, then I think it's as the head of the party, it's the governor's responsibility to say, this is not what Michigan is going to look like. He talks about being welcoming to people from around the world, making Michigan a mecca for opportunity. You know, that's what he talks about. And then he signs legislation in that bars benefits for, you know, for homosexual couples or couples who are just unmarried. You know, that is discrimination. And so long as this governor, all the rhetoric in the world can't clean up the behavior. And I think that's why you see people shunning the party on issues like that, because they know that there's no leadership in the Republican Party that really follows through with the talk. Talk's cheap. We need to show that Michigan is a place that is welcoming to all, that gives opportunity to all, that values diversity and values equal rights and human rights. And I think, sadly, that the leadership on that particular side of the aisle is not leading.
On the gay rights issue, what can the state legislature do right now to improve the climate for LGBT individuals in the state?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things we could do. We could amend our Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. We could, to ensure that people have the same protections. We could expand our anti-bullying legislation to identify certain classes of people that we know are subjected to bullying. I think that we should open up civil unions to every couple who wants to make that kind of a commitment, and that's what the state should recognize. There are a lot of things that we could do. It's very heartened to see Mike Cox's comments that, you know, he's got this new view on the issue of gay marriage. Unfortunately, he's not the Attorney General any longer, and I never thought I'd say that. It's unfortunate that he's not our Attorney General, but, you know, the ideological position of the current Attorney General, I think is really unfortunate, and I'm glad to see Mike Cox is having an evolution. Would have been nice if it had happened when he was in a position of authority, though.
Sure. Looks like we have time for probably just one more question. This comes from reader Michael Booker. Is collective bargaining under attack in Michigan, and how effective do you think unions can be in stopping privatization efforts? I guess, can you speak to the larger issue of collective bargaining and union influence and or
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
I don't think.
Sorry, I was trying to rephrase
That's okay.
that, but you know.
I don't think even the casual observer can watch what's happened at the Capitol and conclude otherwise. You know, I think he's absolutely right that, you know, the premise of the question is it is under attack. Collective bargaining is under attack. Workers' rights, workers' ability to, you know, bargain for, you know, rights in the workplace is most certainly under attack. Right now, you know, my Republican colleagues continue to talk about, you know, eliminating living wage. You know, that's something that is on the table. It's one more step to take away workers' rights and to, you know, strengthen the hand of business. And, you know, I think people on both sides of the aisle want business to be successful. We want Michigan to be a place where businesses locate. You know, the view that you only create a good business climate by taking away workers' rights is absolutely wrong. You create a better business environment by creating a better educated workforce. That's where we should be spending our efforts, not at taking away people's right to negotiate, but making sure that we've got the best workers in the world so business will locate here. Bill Gates, who has had quite a bit of success in business, is the first person to say that tax policy is not what drives the business decision where to locate. It's whether or not the workers there are ready to do the jobs. That's the most important thing that we can do to move Michigan forward. That's what I'm going to talk about in we've talked about it in every question you've asked, but as this budget moves forward, as we go into 2014, that's where the Democrats stand.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator, so much for joining us. Thanks to all the viewers and readers who are following along online. We're going to try and do these pretty regularly.